Hello students. Today we are going to take up the chapter The Last Lesson. I find it a little ironic that this is the first chapter in your textbook Flamingo, and yet the name of the chapter is The Last Lesson by Alphonse Daudet. Do you know what is linguistic chauvinism? Well, linguistic chauvinism is unconditional love for one's own language. This love is so much that one considers one's language to be superior to all the other languages of the world. Okay, on a lighter note, imagine you are in a foreign country, let's say France, and you meet someone from India. First thing you do is to greet the person with a Namaste. And let's say you are from West Bengal and the other person also appears to be from the same state. In that case, what happens? Which language becomes your medium of interaction? Without any doubt, Bangla. This is linguistic chauvinism, to take pride in one's language because that is your identity. It is something that binds you to your roots. But well, I'm saying it in a very positive manner. In the context of the story, the order from Berlin is the most appropriate example of linguistic chauvinism. The Germans were victorious in the Franco-Prussian War. In this story, the French districts have passed into Prussian hands. The Germans tried to impose their language on the people of Alsace and Lorraine. The story highlights the love of a French teacher and his student Franz for their mother tongue. A word about the author, Alphonse Daudet. He is one of the finest French novelists, dramatist, and short story writer. He is best known for the role he played in the transition of 19th century theatre. The writer is fondly known as the French Dickens, mostly wrote sentimental tales of provincial life in southern France. In the spirit and method of Charles Dickens, Daudet developed his own somewhat impressionistic style in his works. So, the main theme of the story is that it showcases how one's language is a key part of one's identity. It also highlights how language becomes most significant in times of crisis when one's identity is endangered. And what happens when there's an attempt to slowly sever the tie between a people and its language by a powerful enemy? The last lesson is a great reminder of how we cannot take our language for granted and how important it is to love and learn one's language in order to protect one's individual and collective identity. And above all, nothing comes of procrastination. It is human nature to value something only when it is taken away from us, isn't it? So all these highlighted phrases are important, children, from your board perspective. Let's look at the main characters, Franz and Monsieur Hamel. M stands for Monsieur, which is Mr. in French. The background is about the annexation of Alsace and Lorraine by Bismarck when his army stormed in the year 1870 and held these two districts under the Prussian control right until the First World War. The message of the story is about linguistic chauvinism, how to protect one's identity, patriotic fervor, and above all, war only divides. So now for the point-wise summary of the lesson. This story, remember, it is a story of change which is seen through the eyes of a child. And in 1870, when Prussian forces under Bismarck attacked and captured parts of France. These two districts were governed by the Prussians, and the new Prussian rulers discontinued the teaching of French in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The story describes the day when the rule came into effect. So, the story opens with Franz walking reluctantly to school as he is not prepared, one, for his class on participles, two, he was late for school. And not only that, there were many things that were tempting him to stay away from school. And this is given right on page 2, first paragraph, that it was a warm, bright day. Birds were chirping and Prussian soldiers were drilling. So, all these things were keeping him away from school. Yet, he gathered courage and walked to the school, thinking that even though he was late, he would just slip into the class. And on the way, when he passed the town hall, he sees a crowd in front of the bulletin board. For the last 2 years, all the bad news had come from here. Bad news like the lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer. Underline this also, children. This is important again as a 2 marker. So, as Franz was heavily banking on the usual commotion of the class, and he was planning that he'll quietly sneak into the class without attracting the attention of Monsieur Hamel, but to his utter dismay, he finds school as quiet as on a Sunday morning. So please turn to page 3 and underline these lines. Usually, when school began, there was a great bustle which could be heard out in the street, the opening and closing of desks, lessons repeated in unison, very loud with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. So, this is what he was banking upon. But he finds that school was very quiet, and he was so frightened and ashamed that he quietly opens the door and enters the class. And surprisingly, Monsieur Hamel is rather kind towards him, and he doesn't reproach him for being late. Instead, he says, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning without you." So Franz is completely surprised. Not only this, he is also completely taken aback to see that his teacher was in his best attire. So he notices that the teacher has put on a green coat, a frilled shirt, and his black silk cap, which is usually worn by him on special occasions like award ceremonies and inspection. The second thing that surprises him is the fact that school was exceptionally strange and solemn. And last but not the least, the back benches were occupied by the village elders. So he sees old Hosser, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and many other village elders sitting on the back bench of the class, all seated with a sad look on their faces. So these are the things that actually surprised Franz. Remember them, I've highlighted it also. And after this, the teacher drops the bombshell when he says, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools, and the new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive." And that is when Franz is completely shocked. And then comes the realization that his books that seemed a nuisance till now were like old friends. He also regrets not having taken his French lessons seriously, choosing instead to seek the birds' eggs, go sliding on the Saar. This is to be his last lesson, and he doesn't even know how to write. He also feels sad for Monsieur Hamel, a man who had given 40 years of service to the place and who was being told to leave it forever. So, this immediate thing that happens is very important, that he was completely shell shocked, and his books, which were till now a nuisance, became his old friends. And he starts regretting all the days that were lost. And now he understands why the village elders were there. They were there because they were sorry, first of all, and it was their way of showing their gratitude and respect for the master's 40 years of service. So then Fran's name is called to recite the rule for participles, and what happens? He fumbles. Remember, he had not revised the rules. But again, he's surprised that Monsieur Hamel does not get angry. Rather, he says, I won't scold you, little Franz. Now, this is on page 5. Underline this. Uh, every day we have said to ourselves, Bah, I have plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow. And now you see where we've come out? Ah, that's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow. And then the very important line, I've highlighted it also, we have all a great deal to reproach ourselves with. So he is now holding each one responsible for this attitude of procrastination. So first he talks about parents who preferred money over studies. So you can underline on page 5, third paragraph, your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills so as to have a little more money. And then look at the character of the teacher when he owns up that he also took his duty lightly. And I'm reading from the text. I have been to blame also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? That takes a lot of courage, children, to own up that yes, I'm also responsible. So, Monsieur Hamel holds each one responsible for this attitude of procrastination. He then moves on to talk about French as the most beautiful, most logical language in the world, and gives this very important advice to the children and the elders. We must guard it and never forget it. Another very important line. And I think so this is one of the most important lines, because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. Now, this story is very relatable. Uh, with the imposition of language in different areas by various rulers, Indian struggle for freedom is the best example about holding on to one's language, isn't it? It should be amply clear that the need to learn and respect one's language is of great importance. And who knows that better than us? So after this, Monsieur Hamel then begins to give the grammar lesson. Franz understands everything very easily. It seems, that earlier he had not listened so carefully and Monsieur Hamel had not taught as patiently as he did in his last lesson. The grammar is followed by the writing lesson, and everybody gets down to writing, and the class is filled with a pin drop silence. To the extent Franz hears the cooing of the pigeons, and he says it's on page 7. Will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? So Franz is wondering whether the Germans will impose their language on the birds as well. This line actually shows his anger, his frustration, and the way the Germans are forcing their language on the French. Now, Franz looks at his teacher, who it seems wanted to fix every single sight in his mind. And he was courageously listening to every chant of babies chanting Ba Baby. The clock struck 12 and everyone could hear the trumpets of the Prussians. Monsieur Hamel stood up, choked, and then wrote on the blackboard, "Vive la France, long live France." So that's the end of the story, and it is indeed a very poignant description of what happens when a country or a place like Alsace and Lorraine is taken over by the enemy. So let's look at the multiple choice questions. This is, as I have been telling you, this is the latest format of questions. We have all got a great deal to reproach ourselves with. These lines spoken by Monsieur Hamel tell us about what? Yes, option D, all three: neglect of duty done by the teacher, mercenary attitude of the parents, procrastination of students. Next one, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? This line highlights option A, anguish at being enslaved. Now let's look at the 2 markers, short answer questions. These are from your CBSE question papers 2020. Why did Monsieur Hamel blame the parents for their children's poor performance at school? Yes, I read it from the text also. Parents preferred children work in fields, and they were anxious enough to have them. They were not anxious enough to have them learn. Sorry. Why was there a crowd in front of bulletin board? Yes, we've discussed this. It was the time of war. The bulletin board was the source of all bad news. The order from Berlin to teach only German was also put up here, and that there would be no more teaching of French. Why did Hosser and other villagers come to attend the last lesson? Very important question. They wanted to express their repentance for their casual approach to their own schooling, wanted to thank Monsieur Hamel for his 40 years of dedicated service, wanted to show respect to their country, which was no longer theirs. The next one, what a thunderclap these words were to me. Why was Franz shocked and surprised? Franz was totally shocked that German will be taught, guilty of not learning his own mother tongue when he had all the time, and that his books became his best friends. Long answer, as I said, this is a very important line. When a people are enslaved, this line, understand. First of all, as I've been telling you, divide your answer in 3 paragraphs. Give an introduction. Now, quote the same line and say that it's true, because mother tongue gives one his identity, and mother tongue is something that helps a person to express his feelings and thoughts most intelligibly. Then, as long as a person is connected with it, he will have hope. It is this bond that helps in breaking away from the shackles of bondage. And history has many instances, this can come in conclusion, of rulers imposing their language on the vanquished. You can give examples of the Mughal rulers, the British rule on Indians, to name a few. Thank you. Good luck. If you've liked the video, share it with your friends, and I hope this is helpful.